Pablo Picasso said that every act of creation is first an act of destruction. It's a pessimistic way to start what's supposed to be an uplifting video, I know. But here, it has two reasons for its relevancy. The first is that the video, unlike my others, does not show any part of the destruction represented in a disassembly process. And the second is that I'm not creating a motorbike, I'm rebuilding one. There is a difference. The difference itself leads to a third point, and it's the reason I chose the artist Picasso for this video's quote. There's not much imagination involved in rebuilding a motorbike. My imagination is limited to works of fiction developed through loving parents and a tertiary education. But I don't have one artistic bone in my body. I couldn't draw a stick figure to save myself. I was always jealous of people who could draw. And it might just be because they made it look easy. But that's how any expert is viewed by a layperson. For example, if you've never built furniture before and you watch a master carpenter build a table from start to finish, it would seem like it was a result that was achieved quite easily. But the illusion is the stuff that you don't see, the years of practice and the reasons behind the choices of materials, equipment, technique. More importantly, with any work of art, what the viewer doesn't see is the imagination behind the original concept. All we can see is the result. In fact, the word imagination is what we call an abstract noun. A noun that denotes an idea, quality, or state, rather than a concrete object like engine or tire. Truth, danger, freedom are all examples of abstract nouns, and all emotions are abstract nouns. Is it just a coincidence that an entire movement of art is under the label of abstract? I doubt it. My father and both my brothers are amazing artists. And as I said before, when I try to draw a dog, it looks like an octopus. Jealousy is a very destructive emotion because it usually leads to a negative outcome. If a 3-year-old child is jealous that their friend has a ball, they might take that ball from them to ease their own suffering and convert it into a positive emotion. But this has to be at the expense of others. In this case, it's the little boy whose ball was stolen. In adults, who have more of an understanding of consequences, the result of jealousy that can't lead to actions usually manifests in other harmful emotions like anger, resentment, regret. And this is the reason it's difficult to admit one's own shortcomings, because you are the one assuming the negativity as relative to someone else's. It's a self-reflection, and it's why I stopped writing, even though everyone tried to encourage me by saying that I have talent. A real writer is his own worst editor, and I hated reading everything that I wrote. So I was in a field where creative freedom was almost infinitely unlimited. An artist has a license to choose any given outcome, whether it makes sense to anyone else or not. And it was up to the audience to interpret. But to me, the abstract world was confounding, and I started to see beauty in the way things came together in reality. Probably because it was in direct contrast to the process of creating art. Machines have no tolerance for imagination. They require very specific procedures with specific components and operations to achieve predictable and repeatable outcomes. I can't fix a motorbike by imagining a square peg fitting in a round hole. Everything needs to be executed just as it was designed. Designing a vehicle is a very different story. This is where an engineer needs to have a flair for the dramatic, while still being able to reconcile concepts in physics. but I stay in my lane. I enjoy the physics, and my artistic license has been suspended indefinitely. So I wouldn't assume to be able to design a bike, but I can reconstruct them. And if you can reconstruct something by understanding its intricacies and its potential, then you should be able to modify the original concept with a modicum of imagination and a pinch of skill. Moving from the field of arts to a mechanical trade completely changed the way I think. I was used to the solution to any given problem starting with why not? Why not give the main character a different backstory? Why not give the lover a chronic illness? Now, however, I needed to adopt and rely on skepticism and critical thinking, and replace all the why nots with just why. It's a question that is widely taken for granted in the repair industry, and one that is the most underrated. And it's any technician's greatest weapon when it comes to a differential diagnosis. The most common mistake is to think that knowledge and experience are the best tools to possess. But the real key, believe it or not, is skepticism. The ability to doubt the claims that are assumed to be true. Let's unpack this with a simple example. Thou shalt not steal. So it is said, so it is written. Now you can either accept this or deny, and either of those choices have a consequence. But the third option, the correct one, necessarily delays the consequence, because the third one is to ask why. It is unreasonable to be punished for requiring further clarification, simply because the blame needs to be passed on to the one who made the rule for not making it clear enough. So if we apply this method without prejudice to the field of mechanics, any given problem will eventually meet a conclusion. Why is the bike not running? The battery's flat. Why is the battery flat? Customer kept cranking and it wouldn't start. Why wouldn't it start when the battery was good? Fouled the spark plugs. Why did the spark plugs foul? Fuel leaked into the cylinder. Why did fuel leak into the cylinder? Leaking fuel pump. Why is the fuel pump leaking? Cracked O-ring. Why is the O-ring cracked? And so on, and so on. You can keep asking why, and there will always be a follow-up. And if you forget the power of this question and merely accepted any one of those earlier conclusions, you would have gotten it wrong, overcharged the customer, and not fixed the actual problem. In this example, why is the bike not running? Battery's flat. Okay, replace the battery. But that's not the problem. Spark plugs were fouled, change the spark plugs. Now we've wasted a battery and a set of spark plugs and still haven't found the problem. This is a different method. It's called the process of elimination. And while it can be useful in some circumstances, it should be considered a last resort because it completely bypasses the critical thought process. It is only useful in the way that we now know the problem is not the battery or the spark plugs. So we can question other things. However, it's already cost us the price of those two items and the time wasted in replacing them. But let me stop jabbering about things that may seem like they have nothing to do with motorcycles. Let's actually discuss what I'm doing here because it's kind of cool. There are three elements needed to make fire: heat, fuel, and oxygen. We all know petrol is flammable. If you take a little dish and put some fuel in it, set it on the floor and ignite it, it goes woof. It burns by consuming the air around it under atmospheric pressure. But if we were to take that small amount of fuel, put it in a jar, and squeeze more air into the jar, and then ignite it, that air-fuel mixture would go bang. It doesn't just burn, it explodes. The reaction is amplified when the mixture is compressed. So we can consider internal combustion engines to be nothing more than air compressors with a fuel and ignition system. The heat needed for fire is started by the ignition system, and this can be manipulated pretty easily because we know how to control electricity. The fuel system is controlled by either a series of small jets which can be made larger or smaller quite easily, or a computer that tells an injector when to open, and computers are programmable. So the one element of fire that is the hardest to control is the air. An engine sucks in air while introducing fuel, squeezes up the air-fuel mix, explodes it, and then expels it, and then does it all again. So by the example of the fuel in the jar, if we can get more air in, we can compress more and get a bigger bang, more power. One way to do this is to literally force more air in. We can do this with turbos and superchargers, but they're bolt-on and I consider them cheating. We call it forced induction. Naturally aspirated engines are those that are limited by how much they can suck in to get a good enough compression. We have a really good understanding of fluid dynamics. We can calculate very accurately how big an opening needs to be to allow a certain amount of air in. And one way of doing this is through the inlet and exhaust ports in the cylinder head. Because we know that there are lots of similarities in the way that gases and fluids move, how they react to turbulence, boundary layers, restrictions, laminar flow, and all that good stuff. But the main things that need to be considered are volume, speed, and pressure. And without forcing induction, it's very difficult to get an equivalent improvement in both. If I just make these holes bigger, I will increase the volume of air getting into the engine, but according to fluid dynamics, this will necessarily decrease the speed of the air. This is good for horsepower, but not so good for torque. If I change the shape of these ports, the airspeed might increase, but the pressure might decrease along with the volume. We also know how air reacts to going around corners, and we know how airflow reacts to different surfaces. Now this is a lengthy and labor-intensive process, as you can see, which only improves performance, not necessarily efficiency. So manufacturers don't do it. The cylinder head is cast into an aluminium mold, so the intake and exhaust tracts are set solid, unable to be manipulated by a computer. They can't even afford the time to smooth the rough surfaces because they're not building one of these, they're mass producing, and it's just not feasible. And the casting process is done in a mold of sand. Think of emptying a glass of water down a rock wall, and then emptying another glass of water down a glass wall. Which glass of water is going to hit the ground first? Then you take into account the ugly seams where the molten metal is joined. Then you take into account a round wall passage becoming a square seat. All of these are directly related to the way air can move through them. So here we get to use a bit of artistic technique to smooth out a rough surface and correct the shape of a tract. All the hope of getting more air. Not only more air, but faster air and straighter or less turbulent air. Because if we can do that, we get a bigger bang. Sometimes air moves better in a D-shaped tunnel, depending on the direction, rather than a perfectly round hole. It might look like it, but this is not guesswork, and I'm not just making a bigger hole. We can test the effect of the modification quite accurately under vacuum and remove or add material according to what we're trying to achieve. I didn't flow this cylinder head because the customer's not a racer, and this just needed a general all-round improvement. I wasn't focusing on either horsepower or torque, but with the amount of rough casting and lazy machining, there was enough to take out without going overboard, and it made a huge improvement. But from the outside looking in, it might seem like this is the only artistic license we get to use as technicians. And I guess you could be right, but I'd argue that it only looks like I'm using imagination, when really I'm using known physics and fluid dynamics as a reference. It should be clear by now that I love talking about this stuff. This is the stuff that I find relatively easy to explain. The science behind the art, the facts. It's only due to the lack of subjectivity, I think. Some things are the way they are. And I'm not saying I'm right about everything related to motorbikes, but if I think I understand a mechanical concept, then I get a lot of joy from helping others see what I can see. It's why I became a teacher. But it would be wrong to rest on their knowledge, especially when they're given some authority to teach others. It's why I get my students to constantly ask why after every concept I explain. And it doesn't matter what I'm trying to explain. It will always draw them closer to the root cause, rather than just replacing a part to fix a problem. Like if I tell my students that the bike won't start because of an issue with the starter motor, and they just keep asking why after every next step explanation, eventually we will end the conversation discussing electron flow at a molecular level. I look at my students, my first year apprentices, and I'm so jealous that they are so low on the learning curve. I mean, of course, I'm happy to be there for them, to be the one to drag them up that slope. But there's always a resentment there, that they don't appreciate how lucky they are to be employed to learn this stuff, the way I felt when I was an apprentice. So a few years ago I decided to address the jealousy. I wanted to feel what I used to when I first got into mechanics. And I was in a part of my life where complacency had settled in. So I went back to school for 3 years part-time, got an advanced diploma in mechanical engineering. It was the most demanding thing I've ever done. And it's not surprising then that on completion it became the most rewarding. The reason I did it was not just a continual search for answers, but more so it was the need to challenge myself. And my God, it challenged me. The physics, the chemistry, material science and maths. Holy crap, the maths. I would be sitting in class at the age of 40 thinking I hated school and especially maths. But this time I was enjoying it. I was faced with a problem and a goal was to follow a logical sequence to achieve an expected outcome. And by the end of it, my notebook was Goodwill Hunting with a one-line question. I had 2 or 3 pages of random symbols and the final line represented an answer. Even better, whether or not the answer was correct, we could go through the steps and locate where I went wrong. Without knowing, I was discovering through technical maths the reason for my obsession with motorbikes. I would show my work to my then wife, and all she would see is scribbles, but I saw a path to an answer. It's like the times when my dad catches me at work, up to my elbows in engine parts. One time I had the side cover of a Kawasaki Vulcan for some reason I can't remember. With the side of the engine exposed, it was just a clockwork of gears. I mean, this thing was way over-engineered. But he looked at it and said, "Jesus Christ, how the hell do you know what you're doing?" And it just made me feel like Neo from the Matrix, because all I see is everything where it's meant to be. I can name every part and the reason for its existence. There's such an irrational superiority when it comes to knowing things that other people don't. So I ground myself by thinking that my dad's a builder, and I wouldn't presume to know how to start laying a foundation. Along with art, that's his passion. And to both those fields, I must admit ignorance. But when it comes to things that are mechanical, the only reason I might have a lot of knowledge is because I love it and stuck with it. Even my keyboard is mechanical. Before the widespread use of word processors, people used typewriters. These machines were clunky, rigid, and loud. Every stroke was part of a symphony of clacks, dings, swipes, and endless ratcheting. An office full of them was deafening. The next evolution of digital word processors came in the form of computers that had keyboards seemingly made to mimic the feel and setting of a typewriter. There was a real sense of confidence in the result of striking a key, and it has a profound impact on the user. It's not surprising then that when a writer is onto something, they hit the keystrokes quicker and sometimes louder, harder. Eventually, the use of keyboards became so prolific that when used in an office chorus, there was a clear need to make them quieter. So their materials changed, their mechanics changed. Metal moved to plastic. They became even softer with silicon, physically easier to use. Fast forward to the digital age, and we've decided the keyboard is now superfluous. We don't need it. We touch the very screen we're reading from. This is the total opposite of its ancestor, the typewriter. Consider the difference with your smartphone. In order to type a single letter, there's not even a button. There's an icon. A location of a symbol placed somewhere for convenience. This location is programmable and only relevant to where you think it should be. When you tap it, that's all you're doing. Touching a portion of the screen. There's no physical response, unless you program the device to vibrate with each haptic touch. There's no physical button to push in and wait for it to return to its original position under spring pressure. There's no noticeable energy transfer in the form of mechanical change or even auditory response. So the only way to confirm you've actually typed something is to watch it while you're doing it. While I can see the advantages of the old school, the best thing I did for myself was to buy a mechanical keyboard. If you have a desktop computer with a standard late model keyboard, I strongly recommend it. It's a game changer. I can feel every letter. I know every depression has made a mark. Every stroke gives a physical and audible response, and so it gives me some kind of emotional response, whether I'm registering it at the time or not. Look, I realize I might be making a big deal out of a small solution, but it's such an obvious analogy of the way humans interact with technology. We're digitizing our very thoughts through these things. And this is one of the tools that we use. When we write on a computer, keyboard is the main go-between for our physical existence and the technology we're using. Now, I'm a very hands-on guy. I need to touch things. And right now I'm spewing forth some ideas that were recorded with my hands. A mechanical keyboard makes this experience a tactile one. It adds a layer of biomechanics to literature, and it's in direct defiance of technological improvement with regards to human interaction. So I learned really quickly that questioning everything is the best way to keep getting answers. The moment you accept an answer is the moment you stop searching. Water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius. But why? Don't worry, it just does. Okay, fine. Now, when someone asks me the temperature at which ice forms, I will be able to tell them. I have no idea what I'm telling them, or if it's even true, or how it's possible, but I'm able to regurgitate someone else's conclusion. I see now just how powerful this practice can be, that earlier on in my career, I didn't even realize how it was shaping my thought process. My girlfriend says the toilet's overrunning. The tank fills up normally, then dribbles into the bowl, wasting water. My younger self would have resigned to call a plumber, and this would have been perfectly acceptable, as eventually the toilet would have been fixed. But at that point, all I could think was, something is supposed to work properly, and it's not working properly. Now I could pay someone to fix it, but I think I might be able to fix it if I just keep asking myself why, until either I'm able to find a conclusion or I hit a roadblock. It turns out that there was a gasket connected to a valve which is actuated by a lever attached to a float. And this is exactly the same way a carburetor works. Now let's be clear, it's not that working on motorbikes made me a multi-skilled genius. I could have done some real damage to that toilet by poking around in things I'm not familiar with. But there's a growing sense of capability that needs to be kept in check by common sense and admitting to being out of your depth. It's just that the love of the particular machines I was working on fostered an inherent curiosity and a selfish need to find answers. Then there was a constant search to find the satisfaction of figuring things out and making them work again. Window won't open? I'm on it. Lawnmower's busted? I'm all over it. It doesn't mean I can fix everything, absolutely not. If the satisfaction of fixing things was my drug, then admitting to a customer that something is beyond repair is a serious downer. Anyway, as mechanics, we have to relentlessly ask why with everything that we do. Even the simplest task like tightening a bolt needs to be done with focus. Why is this bolt not tightening the way it should be? Because if we didn't ask that particular why, the bolt will snap, and that's not fun. My girlfriend is constantly trying to account for the modern human body by using evolution as a basis. Why do men have facial hair but women don't? Is it so they can keep warm while hunting in winter? There must be a reason we became this way. It's adorable because the reasons are always completely obsolete in today's society. But if I apply this thinking to the use of technology, it breaks down. A caveman is being attacked by a bear, so he grabs his club and goes to defend his home. A second caveman says, "Whoop, hold up," grabs his iPad to control a drone with an onboard flamethrower to scare off the bear. The bear would run away and the first caveman doesn't get hurt, but if he wants to replicate this result, he now needs to learn another language, how to use controls to transmit commands. This is completely counterintuitive in natural terms. The use of machines to do work for us is one thing that separates us from the bulk of the animal kingdom, fine. And in my case, I focus on machines that were designed for transport. But no one needs a leader-class sports bike to get from A to B. So there needs to be something else about its appeal. And this is where the technology needs to rise above the needs of human interaction and offer something greater. This is where engineers stop and designers begin. An engineer will build the most efficient vehicle, but a designer will build the best looking. And so here we come to the bring it all together moment. When a bike is truly designed by an imaginative and talented engineer, in my eyes you get a work of art. All the males in my family are artists and they see art differently. I wish they could see what I see. I worry that everyone thinks I romanticize my trade too much. But shouldn't a bricklayer stand back and take pride when he builds a perfect arch? What if a plastic surgeon repairs a scar so that the patient is reminded of the accident every day for the rest of his life when he looks in a mirror? Emergency plumbers don't get enough credit. You go stick your hand in someone else's clogged toilet and then tell me you're going to give them a discount. Wow, I'm totally off track now. This has just turned into a rant. But give me a break, this is a long video. Actually, this video is too long. The analytics say that the average view time is 4 minutes. So if you're still here, what does that say about you? You saw the timestamp, you knew how long this would be. Are you using me to procrastinate? I can't blame you for that. I hope it helped. Or maybe you like to listen to the ramblings of a madman for half an hour. Or maybe my voice has put you to sleep and you're not even watching anymore. Or maybe you just like to watch a bike come together from nothing. All of its thousands of components working together and forming a machine that hopefully you now think is art on wheels. I hope it's that one. Picasso said, "It is your work life that is the ultimate seduction." And I hope you're lucky enough to find something that you consider art, no matter what it is, and make it your career. And as for my nonsensical ramblings, this was a lot of work, and the customer was really excited to get his machine back in the end. And I don't blame him, because this bike is more than 2 decades old. And just like a Picasso, I see a work of art. But that's just me. You might prefer Harley Davidsons, and that's fine. I guess there's no disputing taste. And if you have made it this far, good on you for sticking with it. And I really hope you enjoyed it. I promise I'll make them shorter in the future. But thanks for letting me share, and thanks for watching.